I'd like to start by thanking EduGrowth for facilitating today's seminar, and I have the great pleasure of introducing and facilitating the conversation between Peter and Hansa. Just a very brief background myself. I started my career many years ago now in education, first working for a number of different universities in the UK and here in Australia, before working for various different EdTech vendors, and then finally and most recently joining AWS to help support partners develop their products such as Wonde and OctopusBI, who we're going to hear about today. But I'd like to hand over to do a very quick introduction to both Peter and Hansa, firstly starting with Peter.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to EduGrowth for the event today. As Chris mentioned, Peter Carpenter, the APAC director for Wonde, and as was introduced as well, obviously, as a data integration layer. So we basically connect school systems together. So the hundreds of different third-party applications, a number of I think are here today. They've messaged me on the side, and connecting them to the school's data source, providing a secure and seamless way to move data between systems.
Thank you, Peter. Hansa.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks EduGrowth for organizing this and inviting me. I'm the founder and CEO of OctopusBI. OctopusBI is a data analytics platform built to transform complex education data into insights and provide that back to stakeholders in the education sector. My background is coming from education, working for schools, K-12 schools, especially managing the IT. And, my last two gigs were at one of the private schools in Sydney, working as their director of IT. So understanding the challenges and pain that education institutes go through with their data is the starting point for OctopusBI.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hansa. Now, we've got a range of different questions and topics that we'd like to discuss today. And I think just starting with some of the points that both gentlemen mentioned here, I'd like to open it up to Peter and explore a little more detail about how you work with various sort of EdTech companies. You mentioned a few just in your introduction there. But I think it'd be good for those who don't know specifically about how EdTech works, if you can kind of expand on your points earlier on and how you help kind of facilitate a lot of this integration, and in particular, understanding that sort of technology stack around schools and universities and why it's different to normal sort of technology that's out on the market.
Yeah, sure, Chris. So I guess it's probably helpful to understand how the technology works as a quick point, and then expand from there. But basically, Wonde, I mean, in the education, especially the high school or K-12 space, schools have generally an administration system or a source of truth for student and parent and contact teacher data. And the hundreds of different third-party applications need to access this in some capacity to be able to provide the services and the products they do to kids and to obviously teachers that are using them at the schools. And so one of the biggest challenges has been for some time is how do we access that data? And so Wonde's basically, rather than, I guess, those third-party EdTech companies having to integrate in some capacity to access this, Wonde just provides a pretty simple, secure API enabling them to connect to us, obviously, in one instance, and then we basically access the 35 different data sources, providing a standardized framework for them to integrate with. So just simplifies that entire process. From the perspective, I guess, of understanding the different technologies in the schools, I think it's one of the aspects that a lot of companies that we work with struggle with, just because every school seems to be quite different in the way they operate, whether that's the tech they use, even to the point where we have instances, we have schools come to us, or we're speaking to different app partners, and might have two schools that look very similar from the outside, but actually on the inside using the same product, but using it in very different ways. And so from a high level, that may look like a product can work in any school environment, but quite often it is very much centered back to the way the school actually uses the tech. So getting an understanding of how they use it is really important to then to either be able to customize it or to be able to ensure that you're servicing the wide majority of what schools needs, as opposed to sort of a one size fits all. And so I guess, yeah, Wonde enables that in terms of visibility, enables that in terms of that clear path to integration and to be able to access that data from those different school systems, no matter what sort of the size or the shape of the school may be.
I think you raise a really good point there about that kind of integration piece, Peter. And if I can, I know from my time, particularly dealing with K-12 institutions across Australia and New Zealand, there's often a bit of a perception around trying to have just a single vendor solution. And could you expand a little bit more on why you might have like a best of breed to support some of those points you made earlier on versus a single vendor solution and the advantages to this?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I think, I mean, there are some certainly the more antiquated, shall we say, or products that have been in the school system and an ecosystem for decades, to the point where what we're noticing more and more is that they're looking to say, how can the schools love the product and don't want to sort of move on from it, but at the same time need to ensure that there are a lot of smaller apps that have obviously hit the market, especially in the last couple of years. And schools are wanting to be able to access those applications, but have them work alongside the cornerstone of their tech ecosystem in terms of their administration products. So the ability for those different applications to for interoperability really is so critical for a school, so that they can have a seamless method of transforming data, but also just to save the time that generally a lot of schools and teachers have sort of have to work through in terms of manually updating products. If you can imagine, school environments where, like you said, rather than having that one size fits all, that one large product, they may work with 10, 20 different applications, and rather than having to manually update those with new students that come for the new year, or a parent changes their phone number or kid changes a class, being able to have that mix of different products interact is critical, I think, to obviously as time moves forward, especially on the back of COVID.
Absolutely, thank you. That's I think that is really important point, that kind of moving forward. And I'd like to pivot a little bit over to Hansa now, because speaking of time moving forward, and knowing a little bit about some of your journey, but which I think is very interesting, how did you move from like an on-prem solution to the cloud to moving it forward in that sense? And what was the reason behind this? And how did you know when to make a change? These are often questions that I certainly encounter in my role currently, and in former roles that I've worked in, is that transition of letting go of the on-prem solution to moving to the cloud.
Yeah, Chris, I think the interesting thing is these things, when you especially start a business or company, you never plan. It's over time that happens automatically with the demand, with the requirements and the requests. So when we first started, I want to give a bit of background where we started. I think that gives clarity on our journey. We started as a consulting company. We used a product that is available in the market, one of the leading products. We took that product and took that to the K-12 market and tried to use that product to get the outcomes. So one of the things we realized soon in that journey is that the education requirements, especially K-12 requirements, are different to all the other corporate sectors. So you can't take a product from the corporate sector and plug that directly into education. It works sometimes, but in most cases there are special requirements that we have to cater. So in that journey, we did our market research. We looked at all the available products in the market, tried to look for a solution that can fit into all our clients or all our customers' requirements, and we couldn't find one. And at that point, we had to decide, okay, what's the next step? Are we going to reinvent the wheel and create our own platform, or are we going to utilize a third party? And we made a bold move where, we decided to build our own data analytics platform that can cater the requirement in K-12 to start with. And at that point, one of the key things is can a startup or can a small company with a product, will the schools let go their data, allow a company to have that data in the cloud? Can they agree to that? And the feedback we got from the market is that, if the data sits inside our school environment, will be okay, but not in the cloud. That was the reason behind building our on-prem platform. And once we started to do that, we completed that, got our clients into our own platform. And throughout that journey, we learned a lot, made mistakes, learned a lot. And at one point, we once again hit a pivot point where, when we had to cater large number of clients, a consortium, or more than 50, 60 clients in one go, the on-prem solution wasn't the platform wasn't scalable enough for us to go on that journey. And at that point, we decided to convert or create our own software as a services platform, and that's what we have done.
And what was the sort of transition time? Can you expand on that a little bit? From moving from on-premise to the cloud, what was that sort of timeline?
So for us to get the MVP, it took us 8 months. And one of the key things I think I need to talk about here is the decision making and what decisions we had to take when we wanted to select, because as a startup or a small company, every decision makes a huge difference of the journey or the future of the company. So we the point that we had to take a decision on the transition, we looked at 4 key areas. We call it core pillars, and we took all the decisions looking at those 4 key pillars. They are scalability, stability, performance, and security. So when we looked at transitioning from on-prem to cloud, that was the key. Can we make sure that our platform is scalable? Not only for, can we cater any clients outside of Australia or scale into a larger group of schools or institutes? And can we provide a stable solution that doesn't have any performance impacts? Third thing is the security. Make sure that our customers' data are secure and they can rely on us on the security side. And the last thing is the performance. Make sure that what we provide has the right performance benchmarking and they can get the outcomes that they need.
I think you raise the pillars that you work towards, I think, are very, very apt for any technology provider, but I think it's suitably and even more prominent for educational institutions that don't necessarily have the full depth of knowledge when it comes to these types of products, but they know that they don't want any of those to be in deficit. So focusing on them, I think, is a very good idea. And it opens up, we've got a question that has come in, I think is quite timely to kind of raise as part of this. Given the nature of education, particularly in K-12, looking after records for students under the age of 18 years, where there is that duty of care that you have to be very conscious of. How do you go about, and this is a question I'll open up to you first, Hansa, but then to you, Peter, how do you maintain that level of security? How do you keep at the forefront of this? And how do you keep abreast of what's happening in that space?
Yeah. From our side, that was one of the key investments that we have made early in the piece. We hired our internal team to make sure that we provide the best of breed security, and from the other side, from the partnership side as well, we partnered with AWS, and with the partnership, we started to closely work with the AWS team to help us out with the security requirements. There are certain tests that they carried out with us to make sure that all our security benchmarks are met. And also, we made an investment from our side to get ISO certified, to make sure that we have the accreditation and certifications to prove that, yes, we have the best of breed security applied to our platform. So we are ISO 27001 certified. And as a business, especially a data business, that's one of the key risks we have. We are handling thousands of data points belong to our clients, and we are doing everything we can to make sure that we apply the right security, and we run penetration tests with third-party companies, getting that tested as well. So I think one of the key investments, other than for the product, what we have done is for security.
Great, thank you. Peter, I mean, given that you look after authentication in some cases and single sign-on, and what would you like to add to what Hansa's mentioned just then?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we've grown in the last, especially the last few years, but we've got an internal security officer. We, as Hansa said, penetration testing on a quarterly basis. So there's a lot that goes on to ensure, as a company, we obviously maintain the integrity of the security side of things. But I guess also just considering 5 years ago, a few years ago for us, even the smaller companies, and I think one of the questions was around, as a small company, how can you maintain the privacy and security side of things? It's a challenge, right? So I guess I think it also depends upon the sector, if it's the K-12 space, what type of schools you're working with, and what jurisdictions require from you in order to operate in their school environment. So there is, maybe mentioned later on there, Chris, but Safer Technology for Schools, ST4S, can post the link later, is certainly something that's a national sort of assessment framework that I think it forms a very good baseline for all companies to obviously need to adhere to in terms of once an assessment's done, but also coming back to AWS as well. I think it's working with organisations that have done this many a time and have those frameworks in place that can guide you through the key phases of again, depending upon where you're at in your product journey or your company's journey, because it can be something that can consume your precious dev resource for a long, 24/7 really. So I think it's just a matter of aligning it to which schools you're working with in terms of jurisdictions and the type of companies that can, I think, help guide you through the process.
Thank you, and I think this leads on quite nicely actually to the next kind of area, given you you're mentioning about your dev team there. I'd be interested to know about the kind of challenges that you face developing your respective products. Peter, given you mentioned devs, we might as well start with you. I think how do you manage that tension of features and product developments and security and those? There's always a tension, right? There's only so many hours in the day you need to work towards. How do you kind of prioritize those challenges that you face?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of sides to it, but I think overall is really impact, like just measuring the impact that any feature request, any change, any wild idea that a customer comes to you with, and measuring the impact on your business, and depending on what stage of the cycle your business is in, if you're focusing on revenue pre-capital raise or something, or if you focus on revenue for a certain stage, or maybe it's retention, your seasonal products or retention stage, or you've just raised capital and you're looking to scale, but you need to set the building blocks around you before you do scale the product. I think that's really important to understand, is what stage you're at and what the impact any of those changes will make. And as long as everyone in the company is aligned to that objective of the goal you set for that quarter or whatever period it is. I think that'll help not just be you making the decision for everyone. It's more everyone's aligned to that objective. So therefore, the feature request, depending on what it is, if it's aligned, well, we go ahead with it. If it's not, then maybe we have to put it back for a quarter or 6 months. So I think defining that clearly up front is important. And then probably the other thing would be around, again, depending on the stage of the company, but it's, are you building for like a localization? So you're building for the local market, so the market you're currently working in, maybe that you started in, or are you building to scale? And, you know, I think there's so many different opinions around this, we want to go global from day one, and that's all great in essence, but at the same time, like we said, with minimal dev resource, or at least, you know, want to make sure you get the most out of every hour. I think striking that balance between the two. So you're not just building for a very niche product for a very small part of the Australian market, but you are, when those feature requests do come through and you do define your roadmap, it's understanding where and when you will scale, whether it's just outside of Melbourne or Sydney or any city, or if it's to another territory. So yeah, finding that balance between the local niche sort of product compared to able to scale to other territories, which you may have a different set of requirements.
Fantastic. Hansa, what about you? What are the challenges that you've kind of faced that you'd like to share, and balancing those tensions as well?
Yeah, I think it's an important point. As a small company started with just an idea to growing up to a stage that we are having these conversations now. One of the key things is the mistakes that we all made. I think every company has made mistakes, and they've how they recover from that. So one of the key things that we look at now closely is the core technologies that we're going to use. Because as Peter mentioned, you have limited resources, you have limited time, limited budget. Doing your research, understanding what needs to be done in what order is really important. Once you understand that, it's easier for you to plan the rest, like your go-to-market, how you're going to take the product, and what's the approach that you're going to take. I think one of the things that a lot of startups don't know, that the help that we can get, the help that is available currently for all of us. Companies like EduGrowth is there to help, and also AWS, Google, Microsoft, all these cloud providers. If you're looking at a software as a services product, they have large teams for companies like us, for startups or any growth companies, to use their resources. So I think in our journey, we've used a lot of time from these companies, especially with AWS, to really work with their solution architects and understand what needs to be developed, how we're going to develop, is it the right solution, how we're going to take that and test it out in the market without compromising the security or the any of the other factors. That help is there, and that's something I think really important to understand, and that's something we didn't realize when we first started. No one told us that you can get free help. It's always, as a startup, it's good to get help, and in this journey we got that help. And the other thing, one of the challenges or things that we have to consider is the changing environment and the factors like how the security requirements change in a product, and in each state the requirements are different. Overseas, if you're looking at UK, US, they have special requirements, so you have to keep an eye on that all the time to make sure that if you have clients in other countries, GDPR requirements or their privacy policies change. So that's something that always a time consuming task, and we have to keep everything up to date. So as a startup, there are certain challenges in the security side, and one of the other key points, we've all now hopefully coming out of a pandemic. expect things that you never expected. End of 2019, no one expected to be in a situation like where we are now. Always plan ahead, have plans where things change, and you have to be agile enough to change your business to cater the needs of your clients. And that's something that we learned along the way.
Yeah, look, I think that's very, very timely. I don't think anyone would have experienced quite what we've been through previously, and having that kind of agility and ability to refocus quickly is I think a lot of what people have learned. And obviously the education space has been really kind of tipped on its head, with some looking at blended models to augment, but now in the last 12, 18 months, that's been fully online for a lot of us, which kind of helps us as we focus sort of this next question. Given that there is, we spoke about your dev team, trying to have focus on what they work on. How do you, as leaders of the business, focus on what is the priority? How do you, I think when we spoke previously, talk about clarity through noise, but how do you focus on what's the most important issue? What do you go, this is where we need to drive our strategy to support our customers, when there is probably so many people looking to transition at a very short window of time? Let's go with Peter first.
Yeah, I guess I touched on it before about the impact and really understanding, like being so, as much as possible, just being definitive and disciplined in what's going to have the greatest impact on your business. Like I said before, depending upon the stage you're at, I think it makes a big difference. I guess probably in addition to that, I think it's a little bit off the question to touch, but I think it's sort of different people in the room probably can align to it from a product versus a sales perspective, perhaps. But looking at when we're implementing different products, obviously in a school, and some of the things we often see with Wonde, you've got schools, you've got new EdTech companies coming through, or anyone obviously believes in their product and thinks it's and knows it's going to make change within a school, but it's just it's the issue that I think we all struggle. Everyone challenges, it's a challenge naturally, is that the priorities that we see in terms of our product wanting to be in a school and a school using it, and the priority a school has with 20 different things they've got on their plate that day. So I think as much around the prioritization of product development and what's going to be done and when, it's also just understanding the fact that whilst obviously onboarding a school, when it comes to they've signed an agreement, they're looking to do a trial or beyond, implement the product in the school, it can take more than a couple of days. It can take weeks or months. And I think being able to adapt your roadmap to that within reason is quite important, because what could, I guess, from a revenue perspective, mean that you've got getting you through the next quarter or the next 12 months can be impacted quite dramatically when you've got you're at the mercy of the school in terms of the time to roll the product out. So I think being flexible in terms of development is quite important. And then probably the other side around that is the access to data to implement the product as well is one of those other challenges. And because it talks to the security side of things, a few obviously questions have been raised around that and how to keep up abreast with all the relevant security protocols that are in place now. And I think just to touch on that, and with schools, we're seeing more and more schools and jurisdictions really tightening up in the way that they allow data to move from their schools out to the third-party applications that the schools use. And so understanding, the way that schools are tightening up in that means that from a security standpoint, again, your API, or assuming the school obviously systems have an API as well, but being able to, like I said, adapt to the timelines that the school puts forward, as opposed to perhaps what you're relying on as a business, and hence what your roadmap looks like. As I said, trying to be adapt as much as possible where possible, as opposed to having a 6-month plan, which, as we know, especially in the early days, will change on a week-by-week basis, not necessarily month-by-month. So I think that both those are pretty important.
Hansa, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is the comment that you made about noise versus clarity. I think noise is important, especially for companies like us. And I think a lot of EdTech companies are there because they're passionate about education. There's a story behind most of our companies where, you know, we are coming from the education background, or we worked in education, or there's something behind a company's starting point. And noise is what you get from your customers, you know, asking about, okay, why is this feature not there? Why this is not implemented yet? Why don't you think about this? I think that's really critical for a company to grow and understand. But you have to be the person who's going to filter that out and pass it to your team. If you just try to pass every feature, the request that you get to your dev team, you're not going to release anything or develop anything. So I think that's the key as a founder or a person running a tech business, to be that noise cancellation headphones in a way, and make sure that you filter out and understand what's the real impact. And data is really important for that. You don't want to develop a feature because you have a client who makes the biggest noise. That's not the reason. You need to look at the impact. How many clients ask for the same feature, and will that benefit the clients that you have? And at the same time, is that going to benefit as a business for you to go to market? Because things can change. You can release a feature that's going to add 10% of overhead to your delivery timelines or how you do things, right? That's not going to benefit. And so just understanding that is going to be really important. And you have to be the bad guy sometimes with your clients and say, no, we can't do it. And if you have that upfront conversation with the client, in 90% of the time, they're okay with it. But if you say, no, we're going to deliver, and then if you can't deliver it for some reason, that's going to be the problem.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And it makes me think about, during my time in education, it's a very hard, if you've not worked in that space, it can often be very hard for outsiders to understand what a kind of unique bubble education is, both in primary, secondary, then tertiary is a whole other field in this area. And kind of extrapolating out of this, I'm curious around the way that you might interact. So if we talk about noise as an example, about when you get an influx of information, I think there's probably times where you probably don't get any noise throughout the year. And typically the academic calendar has a tendency to kind of steer conversations as to what can happen. And for those, like I said, that haven't been involved in that space, I'd be interested if you'd like to comment about how you kind of structure various different components of the way that you manage your business. There's going to be times when you're going to want to probably leverage go-to-market campaigns, and there's also going to be time that you're going to do types of development work. With the advent of SaaS, you have different development windows. I think it's one of the advantages is you don't necessarily have to have those point releases if you don't want. Peter, perhaps if we can start with you, if you'd like to talk a little bit about how you structure your year around development, marketing, sales, perhaps, and communications, and then we'll come back to Hansa.
Yeah, so I guess from our side, looking at the renewal periods, obviously from a school's perspective or a customer's perspective, is extremely important. We build a lot around that because obviously moving back from that allows you to understand, obviously, like I said, from a sales cycle, when we should be targeting our new customers or when we should be looking to upsell existing. And at the same time, from a product side, it's you don't want to be looking at, say, for example, a price rise if you haven't deployed something that is going to assist your schools in the features they've been asking for. So I think sometimes working back from your sales cycle, again, depending upon, it may be that you renew all at the end of the calendar year because that's just the best way for your product, or it might be throughout the year for different stages. So yeah, I think looking at usage and when's the most critical time for your product to be used, if it is a seasonal one, then certainly looking at that as a key date throughout the year to work back from. I think probably there's the other sides. I've seen a few comments around non-technical people in the call, which is great. So I guess not just necessarily talking about product development, but I guess, but also looking at that in the way that you're engaging with your customers. So from a renewal standpoint, not just going back to them when they're looking to obviously renew the contract, but wanting to get their feedback well and truly prior to that. There's no point in, for customers not 100% happy and you're looking to get another 12-month contract off them, you're better off acknowledging that, knowing that in advance from some market research or some, whether you've got anyone reaching out from customer success perspective, and ensuring you are obviously not just listening to them. And I think a lot of customers sometimes, quite often, it's a case of, even if you're not delivering on exactly what they want, if they know that you're listening to their needs and understanding that it is something you are going to address in time, that very much gets you across the line in terms of keeping them happy for that period of time until you have the resource to perhaps deploy that feature or the like. So I think, really structuring your year around renewal cycles and then also from a developer perspective, work where possible alongside that to whether, like I said, if it's that gap of a quarter or so that you need to ensure you're delivering before you're asking for money off as customer, basically. Is pretty important. But again, every business can vary depending on how they the time of renewals as well.
Hansa.
Yeah, from our side, only difference is, one thing we all one thing we understood when we started is that it's a continuous process. It's not like, especially all the new applications that are getting released, you don't have every 6 months a new version that you're going to release. You'll have constant releases that you have to plan. And we try to keep the product up to date and add features, and we are still in the we haven't reached the maturity stage in the product. We're still adding new features and making sure that we add the value. And I think one of the key things we realized is we try to avoid the first week of term if we try to release something, if possible, mainly because of how busy schools are and the impact of that. If it's K-12, we have seen how that time is hectic for schools, and even the IT departments, if you want to call them, you won't be able to get them to a call. So just understanding the education side is it has helped us. But there are certain instances where we can't avoid. We just have to make sure that we provide the solution. So in that case, we have to communicate, keeping the communication up to standard, and giving them the right information with all the release notes and what's going to come out. That's an important part as well.
Yeah, I think they're all things, start of term, exam times, kind of two areas you really don't want to make any major changes, because that generally has a tendency to irk your customers something rotten. I think it's, I'd like to pivot a little bit about sort of, before we look to wrap up this part of the conversation, around kind of partnerships and how you've kind of worked with other EdTech companies. How you've partnered with other organizations to further your growth. How do you go about working with that? We talked a little bit about this earlier on. Hansa, you mentioned about certainly in particular different cloud providers, but how do you identify which comparable products in the market you work with? And by comparable, I mean, there's lots of different learning technology tools out there. learning management systems, school management systems? How do you identify those? Hansa, if you'd like to start, please.
Yeah. So from our side, I think the value of our company is the data that we can ingest into our data analytics platform. So we are a partner-led company. We have every week we have conversations with partners to bring their data into our platform, and I think one of the important thing is to understand what's the real value that you bring, like you can bring to the customers, and also set the priorities right. You can't work on all the integrations to bring data in. I mean, we've integrated with Wonde. We have the Wonde integration there. There are other companies like learning management systems, student management systems, well-being systems, all that. So we set priorities. If a client has a requirement for them to get the data for analysis, we prioritize that. That's one of the key things that we look at. And then the market penetration as well. That's a key factor for us. How many clients that our partners have, and what's the biggest impact we can make in the market as a business. That's one of the key things we look at with partnerships. And every partner adds value to our business, and at the same time we add value to their business. So we need to understand that. And we selecting a partner is a difficult thing. You need to understand what your strengths are, what's the working model, can you really add value to the other business before you go down that path. But we do this now every week with partners to understand what's the best outcome. We are upfront. We don't if you know how partnerships work. You have to be upfront. You have to tell the thing, this is the value that we're going to bring into the conversation. This is the value you're going to get by partnering with us. And once you're upfront with these companies, then it's easier for you to move ahead. Otherwise, it's a conversation that you go back and forth and nothing happens with it.
Excellent. Peter?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Hansa's comments there around partnerships, because I think sometimes companies go in to think they've lined up 5 partners that they think are going to sell their product, and they can sort of sit back and do other things. But at the end of the day, unless they're both aligned to both companies benefiting in whatever capacity the benefit means to them, it's just not worth the time and energy spent on it. You're better off having 1 or 2 partners that you work really closely with, rather than having 20 that you speak to once a quarter. So I think, yeah, as Hansa mentioned, really focusing on where the synergy is between the companies and what both parties, how they're going to benefit. I think definitely, I guess one sort of partners a little bit differently in the way with different companies, whether it's a student management system or a data hub compared to a data consumer, but at the same time, with the same principles around how we operate as well, in terms of if we can't provide benefit for integration to our partners, then they're not going to see the benefit, and hence there's no need for them to work with us. So I think totally agree. Being upfront is critical, and seeing the obvious outcomes and benefits.
Excellent. Now, the bit that I always like to talk about in this space, if you've been in technology and particularly educational technology, where's the future going? What's exciting you? Where do you see? I mean, everyone's more demanding now. All stakeholders within organizations, students' expectations, parents' expectations, educators, administrators, vendors all have these demands. What's the bit that excites you, and where do you see this going? Peter, I think we might start with you, if I may.
Yeah, I guess leading off from the last point around partnerships, I see, I guess, dealing with so many different vendors in all different capacities, from maths products to library systems to learning management and wellbeing. I'd see a lot of consolidation to a degree of companies and products in terms of bring forth, not necessarily from an acquisition or merger perspective, but more just that partnership element, I think, because everyone knows how much of a challenge it is to sell to schools. And I think looking at ways, again, without rehashing what we've just discussed, it literally is, from my mind, I think a lot of those changes will be around how do I work with another company, not just from a sales, but also from a product side of things, and hence what the outcome of two or multiple best-in-breed products working together, the impact that'll have, I think, for not just the teacher that's using the product, but obviously the way that they portray or the way that they sort of put forward their teaching methodology, and if that can hopefully, I think, only improve through innovation on the back of new technologies formed from partnerships. So yeah, I guess that obviously ties into integration in general, but I feel that's what's going to, the next 18 months or so, I'm really interested to see how that pans out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think integration is key for investing in any product. Hansa, I think, given that the rapid change we've seen to moving to online, I'm particularly interested in what you're seeing with the way that you ingest data, but more broadly, where do you see things going in the future?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, especially looking at the changes happened in the last 18 months. Schools move very quickly into online learning, and the curriculum has, we all tried. I mean, I take myself as an educator. We tried to make those changes, but we failed. Like in the past 10 years, we really tried to take schools completely online and have all the resources available online. But now, in the last 18 months, everything is now online in most education institutes, and they conduct lessons online. I'm really keen to see what happens after, what post-pandemic world looks like for education institute. Are they going to go back to their old way of working, or are they going to stick with the online activities that they've taken up? What's the next wave of innovation, how that happens? I think what Peter covered earlier about integration, that's going to be a key. Now all the data points are online, the activities, we track how students learn, and at the same time, what interactions they have with the learning systems. But can we really separate the observations that happens in the classroom? How is that going to impact to a physical school that has been running for hundreds of years? These are the critical things. I don't have an answer, a direct answer to say, this is how it's going to be. I don't have the magic ball yet, but what I feel is, we always talk about 21st century learner. We won't, if you look at a school now, and the data points that we get from the schools, and the data points that schools collect in their learning management systems, student management systems, well-being, pastoral care, boarding, whatever the system is, I don't think that those data points will help us to really identify the student and who is the student, like what's the future of that student. We collect limited amount of data, and this post-pandemic digital schools will have more data points that they collect that we can utilize to understand exactly what's happening with the student. And the last thing to add there is a bit controversial, but we survived 18 months without a physical school. Oh, was there a school in the last 18 months, right? So this is gonna be a challenging topic in the future. Do we need a brick and mortar school to learn? Or can students really, is the knowledge available online now for school or for students to replace a school? I don't have answers to that as well, but these are the things that I see that's going to come up over and over again in the next few years. I think compared to my school ages or the days that I went to school, information is available, knowledge is available readily for anyone to consume and get the knowledge. It's gonna be difficult to put boundaries around students and tell them that this is your curriculum, this is what you have to learn in the next 12 years, and this is what you're going to get out of it. So it's going to be interesting to see next few years how that's going to pan out and what change is going to happen.
What a great way to end it on, with such a big, high question like that.
Sorry about jumping in just then. I just want to say thank you so much to Chris, Hansa, and Peter. Really, really interesting conversation. We do have a lot more questions coming through on the chat. I actually won't go through them right now, because what we're going to have is a little bit of time for everyone to talk with our speakers today in a minute. But yes, like I said, I'd like to thank Chris, Hansa, and Peter. But before you go, what I'm going to do is bring up a little slide, a couple of key takeaways that we've just jotted down for during the session that we'll share with some people afterwards. But Hansa, if you wanted to go again through your 4 must-haves, that would be really useful for people to get a picture of that.
Yeah, so we have 4 core pillars. When we develop our products, we look at any feature, any development decision, we look at 4 key things. It's stability, performance, security, and scalability. If we can't scale a feature or something that we are planning to develop, we don't go ahead with that. And security, performance, and stability. Same way we put that feature or the decision into those 4 boxes and see if we can get a yes from all 4. That's the only time that we move forward. And if we are not sure about a decision, we always ask help before we go ahead and start it. Teams like AWS helped us a lot in those decisions where we didn't really understand the impact of a decision, changing a technology or changing a feature or, changing even the security, way we apply security. So that helped us a lot to make sure that we build a product that we can be proud of.
Yeah. Peter, I'm unfortunately put a few words into your mouth with these 3 dot points. If you'd like to go through them, otherwise I can read them out, if whichever way you want to go.
Yeah, I think you summarised it pretty well, Jeanette. Yeah, very much so. Yeah, partnerships across, like I said, technology or not. It doesn't have to be essentially around products from a partnership perspective, but ensuring, yeah, as you mentioned, benefits are obvious for both parties or multiple parties. And yeah, very much the feedback cycle and understand. I guess it comes back to understanding your customer and hence how when they're in you and what they need, and focus your product around that.
Yeah, I thought that was particularly interesting, and I really like that as a really practical takeaway that people can get from this conversation in terms of action they can take after.